Trigger warning. This chapter of the fantasy novel Elemental Power has scenes which could be disturbing to some listeners, particularly survivors of ritualistic abuse. This book is not for children. Listener discretion is advised. This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. And now, Book 1. Shattered. Chapter 9. Rock of Ages. We had removed as much winter gear as we could, but our pants and tunics were fleece, and they were dripping with sweat. We fanned ourselves with our hands, producing only blasts of hot wind. The air was stifling. The drops of sweat that hit the stone sizzled, evaporating instantly. Only what clung to our skin remained damp. Glenn's complexion was a dark shade of pink. The tips of his elven ears were bright red, and large drops of sweat fell from the tip of his pointy nose. His hair was plastered to his skull, but his eyes remained cool. I wished I could dive into their depths and swim around. It was hotter than a whore in church. He noticed me admiring him and smiled. He leaned in and planted a quick but reassuring kiss on my cheek. I touched his hand, and it nearly burned me. If we didn't get out of here soon, we might just drop dead of heat stroke. "Hello, young warm bloods," Rock said. I was surprised to hear the deep and pebbly voice seemingly come out of nowhere. We hadn't heard him approach. I looked up in the direction of the voice and felt my heart become small in his presence. He was a giant salamander, about the size of a short horse. His body was orange-red, like the heart of a live coal, striped with black like a tiger. His wide, slightly flattened head was inches from mine. Glistening black eyes were studying me openly. He ignored Glenn. I stood, feeling terribly thirsty. My lips stuck together when I tried to speak, but I forced them apart and said, "Great Watcher of the Southern Lands, I am Alana Ellenbill." Once again feeling giddy at the name. "I have come with greetings from Ambius of the East."
"Oh, and what does my old friend say?"
"He bids you greeting and says, it's my turn." The wide mouth opened in what I could only assume was a grin. His black eyes twinkled.
"Did he indeed?"
he asked, chuckling. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say now that my message was delivered.
"Before we get into matters at hand," Rock said, "my servants are coming to clothe you appropriately. They will bring you water as well. I think, perhaps, your natural color is not red."
"Thank you," I said. It felt like someone had thrown a drenched blanket on me and popped me in the oven. I was miserable. Behind Rock, in the large black opening into the volcano, several glowing figures emerged with bundles in their arms. They looked like men made of fire that didn't burn up. Glenn rose to his feet at their appearance. Rock rested, pressing his belly to the floor, wading through the mundane necessities. One of the fiery men approached and extended his bundle to me. I took it, noticing that he was hot to the touch, but not to the point of doing damage. I unrolled it to find a robe made of material so thin it seemed impossible to put on without tearing it apart. The fabric proved strong, though, and I looked around, wondering where I could dress in private. The men of flame formed a circle around me and Glenn, facing outward, providing a private place to change. My dress was yellow like the sun. The bottom hem swept the floor and the sleeves went down to my wrists. When it brushed my skin, it felt like a cool breeze, making goose flesh break out all over. I heard a contented sigh from Glenn and saw that he was dressed in the same stuff, but in a burnt orange color. His smile of relief made me giggle. This fabric would sell like hotcakes back in Texas, I thought, shocked by the sudden knowledge. "What are these men?" I whispered in Glenn's ear on tiptoe.
"They are fire sprites,"
Glenn answered.
"They are my servants,"
Rock said, and the fire sprites walked back into the great doorway. Only one remained. He held a tray that looked to be made of carved quartz crystal. On it were 2 goblets made of the same. He inclined his head to us, indicating that they were ours, and we lifted them thankfully. Inside the cup was water so cold and sweet it rehydrated me instantly. Ice crystals formed inside the cup, but there was no condensation on the outside. The goblet was heavy. We drank all the liquid greedily, relishing every last drop. The fire sprite took the cups from us, set them on the tray, and joined his fellows.
To business, Rock said. Are you aware of the prophecy of Flint?
He asked.
Yes. Then you know that only you can keep the warlord's intended destruction of our world from happening?
Yes, though I'm still unclear as how I'm supposed to do it, I answered.
That is a half-truth, Rock said.
Fear gripped me and I swallowed, remembering Ambius's caution to be only honest in his presence. Suddenly the salamander was in my face, his eye leveled against mine. I was now trying to hide my fear, I realized. Breathing heavily and taking a step backward, I closed my eyes. Rock stepped back and sat on the stone.
There is much hidden from you within your mind.
You can see that? I asked.
More than name or place. Have you ever seen a shattered mirror before?
Yes. I failed to see what that had to do with anything.
That's you. Every crack in the surface is a barrier from what's deeper down. They shattered you from an early age, and the cracks have grown wider. Tell me, do you ever have memories that don't make sense?
Not memories exactly. They're dreams. Sometimes waking dreams, but never something I can just decide to access like a normal memory.
That's because they are beyond the cracks, and those have grown into chasms.
How am I getting to them then without even trying?
Dreams.
Right. I didn't understand. He smiled. At least I thought it was a smile.
As a mirror usually is set within a backing of wood or metal, so is a person set in a backing of the subconscious. That is where we access another dimension, one where our thoughts can create or destroy. If you want to travel the gulfs between the shattered pieces of yourself, you can do so through dreams.
I'm not entirely sure I'd want to, I said. Why did they do that? Shatter me, I mean.
I cannot know that unless you do, child.
Oh.
You are not sure if you want to proceed on this quest.
Hearing it spoken right out like that sounded harsh. I stole a glance at Glenn, who was sitting and watching us. He was no longer bright red, but that statement had visibly upset him. I sighed. That's true. I'm not sure.
It's understandable, Rock said.
I cocked an eyebrow at him. I had been expecting another guilt trip. Why do you say that?
Because you are a leaf on the wind,
he said. I swallowed.
But you do not have to be.
How can I not be? I have no free will.
Of course you have free will.
No, really. You say I've been shattered since childhood. Then I was almost killed and sent to your world. Now I'm told I'm the only hope for all of you, and I really think that's asking a lot from a girl with no memories. Tell me how I have free will. He chuckled.
You can deny your destiny. You can. I can send you home.
That shut me up. Behind him, on the obsidian floor between Rock and the volcanic palace, a doorway appeared. It was battered and wooden. He stepped aside and nudged me toward it with his head. Glenn stood, hands straight against his sides, his face set in a mask of stone. I stepped forward, then stopped.
Open it. You can choose to walk through or not. Open it.
I walked slowly, feeling the invisible thread that linked me to Glenn stretch beyond capacity. I reached the door. My hands were shaking. I opened it. It was a small bedroom, the walls half painted with sage green. It looked like the paint had been there a while, just sitting in the tray with the rollers sticking out. It was dried and crusted, abandoned. On the bedside table, a rotting sandwich attracted flies. The room looked as if it were comfortable, though, and something deep within me recognized it. Is that my room?
You do not remember it?
Not really, maybe a little.
If you step through that doorway, you will return to the life you had, but you will never know why you were shattered. If you remain here, you will have a chance to do something great. I can help you leap the gulfs between the shards. Exercise your free will.
I stepped back from the door. The soul-tied thread that bound me to Glenn was straining. I glanced at him for reassurance, only to see utter terror in his eyes. The whites of his eyes showed all around, and they shimmered with evaporating tears. I turned to Rock. Give me a minute to think, please. Rock nodded. I sat on the stone, ignoring the heat, staring at the abandoned room. What was left for me there? Could I really turn my back on Glenn, Ambius, and everyone on this planet and consign them to death by my cowardice? How could I even consider it? And Glenn, I couldn't betray the one person in either world who loved me. Free will wasn't what I wanted after all.
Of course it isn't,
Rock said. Only now did I realize that Watchers could read minds. He was watching me, his large tail swishing softly on the stone. I couldn't look at Glenn again. I couldn't bear his fear. I stood, studying the room beyond the open doorway, looking for clues. I'd sure left in a hurry. Can you tell me why I left there?
Yes, but only if you choose to remain.
Great. I looked closer. There were blood stains on the carpet, a trail of them leading into the bathroom. I shook my head, wondering why I was even dragging this out. There was only one thing I wanted, that I had, that was worth living for. One thing worth the danger of any world. I turned and ran to Glenn, throwing my arms around his chest, nearly throwing him over with the impact. Get rid of that door, I said, my head buried in the chest of the elf who loved me.
You are wise, child,
Rock said. I turned to watch as the door shrank into a pinprick, then was gone. I could breathe again. Glenn grabbed my face and kissed me hard. When he released me, there was wetness on my cheeks for an instant before the atmosphere took them. I broke from him and walked over to Rock. I am committed. Rock stood and circled me slowly, his tail sliding behind him on the stone. He stopped in front of me and brought a big black eye even with mine.
You are wise. You have my support.
Thank you, I replied. Rock nodded.
Would you like me to tell you about free will?
Yes, I said, reaching my arm back to bring Glenn to my side. He held my hand, and we both sat down, listening.
Free will is both a blessing and a curse. Long ago, my own brother brought sin into your world because he had free will. He was proud and vain, making a pact with Lucifer to destroy my master's creation. I feel I must somehow repay that debt.
What? Are you telling me your brother was the serpent in the Garden of Eden? Again, my mouth spoke without my brain accessing speech. He nodded sadly.
We were both created in the heavenly realms. I was sent here to watch over this world. He was sent to watch over Earth. He was in the garden, walking with Adam and with God, but he allowed the subtle temptations of Lucifer to fill his heart with rebellion. Lucifer possessed my brother and deceived the woman, and a perfect world was twisted forever. He was transformed from a beautiful dragon into a legless serpent. The Creator had always intended his own son to redeem your world. It came as no surprise to him. Just because you have free will doesn't mean the Creator cannot see what you'll choose. He intends for you to redeem this world from the eon of war and destruction. I will help you complete your task.
The rivers running along the sides of the platform boiled. Small fish made of flames splashed up out of the lava and dove back in. This must be the living river royal. I was awed by the beauty of it. This was the place where Flint had seen the prophecy that now directed my path.
Elf, may I borrow your arrows?
Rock asked. Glenn nodded and went to our pile of clothing to pull them from the quiver. A fire sprite approached to receive them. He relayed them to Rock. The great salamander spoke a harsh but entrancing language to the sprite, who took the arrows to the royal, dipped the tips in the swirling liquid, and returned them to Glenn.
Elf, these arrows will now kill the fairy demons. They are filled with light from the flames of my kingdom. Nothing can withstand that. Handle them with great care, he warned.
Thank you, Ancient One, Glenn said. Rock smiled.
You are wise also. I have met elves before without such wisdom, and greatly lacking character.
Ah, so you've met my brother Gable, then?
Indeed,
Rock said.
We seem to have much in common by way of brothers. However, There is some good within yours. It's buried under ages of disappointment, but it is there. I hope that one day you will see it and approve of him."
"I'm sorry if this is none of my business," I said, "but how did Gable meet you and live? He didn't strike me as an honest man." Rock chuckled and turned his black eye to gaze at me.
"You are a woman. He has a great weakness and hatred for women. I sense that you've been subjected to the lust that consumes him." I looked down at the polished stone floor, remembering that afternoon. "Yes, he tried to possess you. A lesser woman would have crumbled before him. Every elf woman he's ever desired has." I felt Glenn stiffen. "But you are not an elf woman. You are human, made in the image of the Creator. You are strong. Gable desires women for their beauty and seeks to dominate them, but he becomes enraged at himself when they, in turn, possess him. Only a woman with no soul and a timid mind would ever make him happy. When he came to me, he became truly honest because he wanted my help. That business is his. I will not tell it. He lives today because there is goodness hidden within his heart. One day, I pray, he will discover it."
I could tell that Glenn was remembering Lillian. His body was pulled tight as a bowstring. I feared the eventual snap. His angular face was hard set, and I could see the muscles of his jaws, striated with anger beneath the skin.
"Glenn Ellenbill, forgive your brother,"
Rock commanded. His voice, formerly deep and with a hint of a purr, became thunderous. Glenn nodded with great effort and let his body relax.
"Gable stole from you, it is true, but I will answer the question that has haunted you for these long ages."
Glenn held his breath.
"The child was yours, not his."
A long, ragged sigh spilled from Glenn's lips, with the tears that filled his eyes, but didn't fall. I felt like I shouldn't be here for this deeply personal subject. He looked toward Rock with intense gratitude. Oddly, I felt as if I was about to faint. I wobbled and tried to fight the lightheadedness that overcame me.
"You are his wife,"
Rock said in response to my unspoken thoughts.
"You are one body. His past is no longer entirely his. Your past is no longer entirely yours. And now you will remember."
At his words, I fell unconscious to the floor. I was lying on my back in the domed vestibule of a grand mansion, staring up at the gaudiness around me. It was far too rich for my taste, almost boastful. I was a great admirer of color, but the mixture of hues in this place was garish. There were dozens of people in the rotunda with me. They wore black robes with ropes tied like nooses around their waists. I felt a chill ripple through me. A man in a white robe came out from a golden door at the far end of the room. Everyone turned to him, bowing their hooded heads. I looked down at myself. I was wearing paint-splattered jeans with a white tank top, barefooted. My attire was horribly out of place, as was my supine position. How had I gotten here? I sat up hastily, wanting to run. The man in white pulled back his hood, and my old boyfriend and professor, Chris, stood there smiling at me like the big bad wolf. "Welcome, Alana," he said, spreading his arms wide in greeting. He swaggered over to me with the air of a king approaching his concubine, pulling me to my feet and air-kissing my cheeks. "How did you find me?" I had been hiding from him, had moved 1,000 miles away just to get away from him. "I've been waiting for you for a long time," he said. His grip around my arm was forceful, drawing me into the gathering of robed figures. "These are your friends," he said, gesturing to them. "I am the high priest of the order." "What is this, some kind of Masonic lodge?" I asked. All the robed figures laughed coldly. "No," Chris said. "Freemasons are a joke, a ruse, a distraction. We are the true keepers of knowledge. I directly descend from the great architect. They merely serve him." "Hail the great architect!" they chanted. I was thoroughly weirded out. "Yes," Chris added, "and hail his daughter." "Hail the daughter!" It was time to go. I tried to break away and run. "You're not going anywhere," Chris said in a voice like ice. "It's time that you fulfill your destiny." "I think you've got the wrong girl," I said, trying to pull away from his grip. His fingers tightened around my arm and I felt the bones bruise under them. "No one asked you to think," he hissed. The group of hooded figures closed in around us. I began to struggle in earnest now, but couldn't break free. They chanted as they crowded around and ripped off my clothes until I was naked, trembling on the cold tile floor. Chris, in his white robe, touched between my legs impersonally, like a doctor performing an examination. "You are beautiful," he said. "Don't touch me!" I screamed beyond panic. He laughed, low and maniacal. The others began to violate me anywhere they could reach. I realized that I was about to be gang raped by people I could never identify. Chris exploded in a yell that sent the other robed figures sprawling backward. "She is mine," he boomed, but the voice was not his. He turned back to me, but the face was no longer his. The eyes were now red, not dark brown. I screamed. "She is my granddaughter," he said, and looked at me with an expression grossly unsuitable to a close relative. It was lewd, evil, malicious. "Who are you?" I asked, sitting up with my knees under my chin and my arms wrapped tightly around myself. He took 2 laborious steps toward me, stopping just before stepping on my toes. My neck had to tilt back painfully to see his face. "I am Crigil Lort. We've met before. Truly, I am delighted by the sight of you. You have the look of a dove," he said, reaching down and stroking a lock of my hair. I tried to pull away. He brutally yanked and my neck popped, being pulled at an odd angle. I hissed in air through clenched teeth. He laughed and said, "Such a pretty dove, and so like a dove, I could snap your neck easily." He released me and I began to shake violently, fear paralyzing my limbs so that I could not run. My eyes were wide like a spooked horse, and they searched frantically for a way of escape, finding none. "Can we have her, Great One?" a man asked. His voice was oily and rabid, exactly what one would imagine a disgusting old pervert to sound like. Chris's hand slapped the terrible man, making him reel backward into the arms of his fellows. He glared at the crowd, then turned back to me. "It is a pity," Crigil Lort said through Chris's mouth, bending down and pulling my chin up painfully to make me look into his vicious red eyes. "It would have been much more fun if you had played the whore just once. But then you wouldn't have been a worthy sacrifice." He turned to his followers and announced, "No, we cannot soil her. Virgins provide far more power for our purposes. Take her below." The man that turned back toward me was now Chris again. His face was pale, and he looked like he was in pain. Good. He watched as they lifted me off the floor and stood me before him, exposed and trembling. "A pity, cousin," he said. "It would have been much more fun." I awoke with a scream in Glenn's arms on the obsidian platform, crushed by the oppressive heat. I was trembling and panicked. I didn't realize where I was at first and lashed out at him. He caught my punching arms and gently forced them down by my sides, putting his face in my line of sight. I became fully present at last. He saw my recognition of him and pulled me into an embrace so strong and loving I began to weep. When my eyes cleared, I looked up into the face of Rock. He was frowning at me. I was trembling. "I'm sorry, child," he said. "You needed to remember." "Why?" I asked, sobbing. "I'm pretty sure I blocked that out for a reason." Rock chuckled, put his wide face to mine, and kissed my cheek. It burned pleasantly and evaporated my tears. "You did, but the time of forgetfulness is past. You will begin to remember more now. Do you realize who you are?" I shook my head, sitting up and wiping my face. Not really. I met him, though. The warlord. He was there in my professor's body. I narrowly escaped being raped by dozens of cult members. Glenn squeezed me tightly again, whispering prayers of thanks to God for keeping me safe from that. I smiled weakly at him. "Think, child. Who are you?" Rock prodded. I looked at him blankly. I don't know. I know I'm his granddaughter." "What is your name?" Rock asked, insistent. "Alana Ellenbill," I replied, receiving another tight embrace from my husband. "No, before that. What was your name in your world?" "Alana Noble. Why?"
There is more, I think.
I'm not sure, I said, unwilling to search any further into my past. He blinked. I felt my eyes grow heavy, and I fought the sensation. It was no use. Once again, I fell into unconsciousness. I was a small child, standing only to my mother's hip. I looked up into her round face. She was pretty, blonde, a bit plump, standing in front of me, tapping her foot and holding a cookie jar. I felt scared of her, recognizing that look. "What did I tell you about the cookie jar?" she asked, huffing. "No touch," I replied, my little voice guilty sounding. "And what did you do?" "Touched it." "You ate all the cookies," she yelled, kneeling down to my level and shaking my shoulders. "Why did you disobey me?" "I was hungry," I said, my tiny lower lip trembling. "Alana Rune Noble, you go to your room." She pointed the way. I came back to myself, sitting in front of the giant salamander. He was waiting for my answer. Glenn was prepared to stop my flailing again, but that memory had been easy. I had a mother. The knowledge was deeply gratifying. "Alana Rune Noble," I said, putting the pieces together slowly.
Rune Noble, Rock repeated.
"Rune," Glenn whispered, looking at me with sudden reverence.
"Yes, elf," Rock said. "Yes."
"What?" I pleaded. "What does that matter?"
"You are the granddaughter of the warlord, which you knew already. You also carry the name of Rune. You are the chosen one of the House of Noble. Did you ever meet anyone with that name?" Rock asked.
"No," I answered, but then remembered. I was stunned into silence. My professor, Chris, he had called me cousin. I think the leader of the cult had the name of Rune. The warlord possessed him.
"This is impossible," Glenn said. "You are bonded to a miracle," Rock told him. "How did you come here, to our world? How did you find yourself in the water?"
"I don't know. They just threw me in and held me down." Rock circled around us again, pacing. I could imagine him standing on his back legs and clasping his front legs behind him as I did with my hands when deep in thought. He glanced back at me and smiled.
"That is all I can see, unfortunately. Silver, the Watcher of the Western Lands, should be able to tell you more. Water is, after all, her domain. Blaze will take you to the outskirts of my kingdom. There he will watch over you through the night. You must make haste to see Silver. Winter is nearly upon the upper lands. You must travel with great speed."
"Can Blaze not take us the entire way?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but not wanting to omit the possibility.
"I'm sorry, child. He cannot. Water creatures tend to fear fire beasts. It's a lot of hot air, but it picked up steam, I'm afraid."
His black eye winked at me, or at least I thought it was a wink, being only able to see one side of his face at any given time. I laughed with far more enthusiasm than such a joke deserved, but it was so incongruous coming from the solemn face of a dangerous ancient salamander. Glenn joined in the laughter, and Rock seemed very pleased with himself. "All right, I get it," I said. "Thanks so much for all your help."
"Yes, thank you,"
Glenn agreed and bowed low. Blaze swooped down behind us, pressing his belly to the ground to allow us to climb aboard. We carried our winter clothes and weapons, hoping they wouldn't fall. When we reached cruising altitude, the sun was sleepily peeking over the horizon. We had been in the land of fire all day. Luckily, we were heading northwest and might have enough time to get the tent set up before the darkness fell. The air became colder, slicing through the thin fabric of the clothing Rock had given us. I began to shiver. In the heat of the southern lands, I had thought I'd never feel cold again. About an hour later, we landed. The rocky landscape shifted into a huge crater lake a few hundred yards ahead. That was the beginning of the western lands, and we set up our tent on the warm rocks of the south. Blaze slept a little away from us, allowing us privacy. We ate for the first time since breakfast, famished and weary, but feeling optimistic about the rest of the journey. We offered to have something prepared for Blaze, but he declined. After dinner, Glenn and I talked lazily, snuggled up in our bed. I relayed the details of everything I'd remembered so far. I wished I had more to tell him. I settled for asking, "What did y'all talk about with the mystics after I went back to the tent?"
Ah, I was told never to leave your side, and that my weapons would do no good against the fairies. At least, not until now.
But you were in that tent for a few hours. Is that all you talked about? He shifted positions and looked at me squarely.
No, we discussed other things, but I'd rather not talk about that at the moment.
He moved his face close, his lips tickling mine as he said,
In fact, I'd rather not talk at all.
If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.